Morning, brethren. Our reading for today's daily devotion is taken from the Gospel of Matthew towards the end of chapter 25. There we read about the coming of the Son of Man in judgment. And I want to read from verse number 34. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." This morning we're thinking about a lady, a woman from the past, and this is a portrait of her. Her name is Elizabeth Fry. Probably you know the name. Her name is synonymous with prison reform. She was born Elizabeth Gurney on the 21st of May 1780 in Norwich. Her father was a partner in the Gurney Bank. Her mum was a relative of the family Barclays, also bankers. So she came from a pretty well-to-do background. Whenever her mother died, Elizabeth was aged 12, and it was left to her to bring up the other siblings in the family. She became very friendly with Amelia Alderson, who in those days was actively promoting universal suffrage, votes for all, and particularly for women. Elizabeth Fry was very progressive in her thinking and very much on the side of needed political and social reform. Religiously, she was a devout Quaker, a woman whose faith was at the centre of her life, and that was expressed through her involvement in the local Quaker society. By the age of 18, she was very much involved in helping local charities. She also played an active role in the Quaker Sunday School, and part of that work was not only teaching the children the message of the Bible, but also helping them to read, teaching them to read. At the age of 20, she married Joseph Fry. He was also a Quaker and also a banker. They moved to London, and from 1809 until 1829, they lived in East Ham in London. Joseph and Elizabeth had 11 children. As I say, she had very strict Quaker beliefs, and although she had connections with members of the upper and middle class in London, she had no time for much of the way in which that society lived. Around about 1812, she paid her first visit to Newgate Prison, and she was horrified by what she saw. She saw squalor, unsanitary conditions, overcrowding, filthiness, malnutrition. She even went so far as to spend a night in Newgate Prison just to get the feel of what it was like to be a prisoner. She sought to improve the condition of the prisoners by taking it upon herself to bring them in clean clothes and also food. She encouraged prisoners to look after themselves more, and tried to encourage within them a greater measure of self-respect. In 1817, she established the Association for the Reformation of Female Prisoners in Newgate. This was one of the first nationwide women's organisations in the whole of Britain. In 1818, she was the first woman to present evidence to a House of Commons committee that had been set up to look into what conditions were like in British prisons. She had the privilege of going and telling them what it was like in Newgate. In 1825, she published a book in which she set out details with regards to the need for prison reform. Her social concerns were not confined to prison reform. She also was concerned for the homeless and established night shelters after she had discovered a young man lying dead on the streets of London. She also established the Brighton District Visiting Society, where various volunteers, mostly women, would visit the poor and offer to help to educate their children and also to help them practically with food and so on. She had a couple of meetings with Queen Victoria, and Queen Victoria was a strong supporter of Elizabeth Fry and what she stood for. She was also supported by Robert Peel when he was a Home Office minister. In 1823, Peel passed the Jail Act, and through that Act of Parliament, prisons throughout Britain were supposed to implement certain minimum standards of hygiene and so on for the prisoners. She also established a nursing school for women, where women were taught to be nurses. This later inspired Florence Nightingale to take several of those nurses trained in the Fry establishment out to the Crimea War. On the 12th of October 1845, she had a severe stroke from which she died. Elizabeth Fry put her Christian faith into practice in very practical ways. I read earlier from Matthew chapter 25, and Jesus said that the evidences of being a true follower of Christ were seen in various things that his people would do, one of which was visiting those in prison, giving food to the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, caring for the poor. Elizabeth Fry most certainly did this, and she was used by God through her practical Christianity to bring about needed reform in British society in those days. It's interesting that most of the reforms that were brought about during the Victorian era were brought about as a result of the influences of Christians. I wonder how much we as Christians are seeking to influence our society on a local level and on a national level when it comes to political decisions. Do we lobby our MPs, our government, and seek to guide them along reform lines that will bring our country more into line with the moral standards and moral concerns of the Bible? Elizabeth Fry is a wonderful example of a Christian being involved in the greater good of the whole of society, bringing our Christian faith to bear upon these things. May God help us to reflect upon these matters. Have a good day, folks.